On the evening of September 18, 2021, the Nguyen family in Canada was preparing for what was supposed to be a simple, warm family gathering. Nothing elaborate, just dinner, conversation, and time together. But when the scheduled time arrived, two important people never showed up. Quack Tran and Christine Nguyen. At first, it seemed like a small delay. Maybe traffic. Maybe work had taken longer than expected. But as the minutes passed, a strange sense of unease slowly began to creep in. Because those who knew Quack and Christine understood one thing very clearly. They were never careless with time. Both of them were known for being disciplined, organized, and respectful of others. If they were even slightly late, they would call ahead. If plans changed, they would send a message. That night, however, their phones stayed silent. Family members tried calling. No answer. They sent text messages. Still nothing. What started as mild confusion gradually turned into something much heavier, a quiet fear that something was terribly wrong. Hours passed with no word. By that point, the parents of both Quack and Christine could no longer ignore the growing dread inside them. A parent's instinct is difficult to explain, but often painfully accurate. The next morning, unable to wait any longer, the families went straight to the police and filed a missing persons report. Authorities quickly opened a case file. According to the initial information provided by the family, the couple had left their home earlier that day to stop by the business they operated together, a gardening supply store in Vaughan, Ontario. The plan was simple. They would stop at the shop briefly to handle a few tasks, then head home in time for the evening gathering. But somewhere between those two moments, something went terribly wrong. Investigators began retracing their final known movements. Security cameras soon revealed an important clue. At approximately 4:50 p.m., footage captured Quack Tran and Christine Nguyen near the intersection of Warden Avenue and Highway 7 in Markham, an area not far from where they lived. From there, they continued driving toward their store. Then, around 5:30 p.m., the couple arrived at their business location, Ultra Garden Supply, located at Unit 6, 111 Zenway Boulevard in Vaughan. The camera recorded them stepping out of their car and walking inside the warehouse. The door closed behind them, and that was the last confirmed moment anyone ever saw them alive. After that, they simply vanished. No phone calls, no messages, no witnesses, nothing. When investigators arrived at the warehouse the following day, the scene at first looked perfectly normal. The door was closed. The lock was intact. There were no visible signs of forced entry, no shattered glass, no overturned shelves. Everything appeared calm, almost too calm. But then officers noticed something unsettling. The couple's car was still parked outside the warehouse, which meant one thing: they had never left. For experienced detectives, that detail immediately raised a chilling possibility. Because when people disappear voluntarily, they rarely leave their vehicle behind. At that moment, a frightening theory began to take shape. If Quack and Christine had entered the warehouse, and their car was still outside, then whatever happened to them most likely happened inside that building. Police quickly sealed off the area and began a deeper search. And within minutes of entering the warehouse, investigators discovered the first signs that something terrible may have occurred. In the back storage area, faint dark stains could be seen on parts of the floor and walls. Small, subtle, but impossible to ignore. To trained eyes, they looked disturbingly familiar. Possible dried blood stains. Even more suspicious, investigators noticed a faint smell lingering in the air. Cleaning chemicals. It appeared someone had attempted to wash away evidence. Then came an even more alarming discovery. Inside the warehouse, officers found the couple's personal belongings, their wallets, identification documents, and cell phones, items no one would willingly leave behind. By now, the possibility that Quack Tran and Christine Nguyen had simply disappeared was rapidly fading. Instead, investigators were beginning to suspect something far more sinister. Something violent, something deliberate. And if their suspicions were correct, the quiet warehouse on Zenway Boulevard might already be the scene of a double murder. But at that moment, the biggest mystery still remained. If the couple had been attacked inside the warehouse, then who had done it? And more importantly, where had their bodies gone? The answers would soon begin to emerge from a piece of blurry security footage and a white box truck that appeared later that night. But what investigators would uncover next would reveal a plan far darker than anyone had imagined. Before investigators could determine who might have wanted Quack Tran and Christine Guan dead, they first needed to understand something far more important: who they really were. Because in most homicide investigations, the answer to the crime often hides inside the victim's life. Their relationships, their work, their secrets, and sometimes the people they trusted the most. Quack Tran, 37 years old, was known among friends and family as a quiet but determined man. He wasn't the type to attract attention. He didn't live extravagantly, and he rarely spoke about his struggles. But behind that calm personality was someone who had spent years working relentlessly to build a life from scratch. As a member of the Vietnamese Canadian community in the Greater Toronto area, Quack understood the sacrifices many immigrant families had to make. Success didn't come easily. It came from long hours, persistence, and discipline. Eventually, that hard work paid off. Quack founded Ultra Garden Supply, a business specializing in gardening equipment and hydroponic growing systems. The store operated out of a warehouse in Vaughan, Ontario. And surprisingly, the business launched at one of the worst possible times: the COVID-19 pandemic. While thousands of businesses across Canada were shutting down, Quack's company began slowly gaining traction. Demand for indoor gardening equipment and hydroponic systems had increased during lockdowns. People were spending more time at home, experimenting with growing plants and vegetables indoors. Quack saw the opportunity early. Customers appreciated his reliability, his knowledge, and his honest way of doing business. Within a short time, Ultra Garden Supply developed a steady customer base. For Quack, the business represented more than money. It was proof that his years of effort had finally begun to pay off. Friends described him as calm, responsible, and extremely focused on the future. He avoided unnecessary conflict. He stayed out of drama. And most importantly, he deeply valued family. But there was someone else in his life who had quickly become just as important. Christine Guan, only 25 years old, had a very different personality from Quack. Where he was quiet and composed, Christine was energetic, ambitious, and full of plans for the future. She had graduated in 2018 from Wilfrid Laurier University with a degree in psychology, a field that required strong analytical thinking and a deep understanding of human behavior. But Christine wasn't finished with her education. After graduating, she enrolled in a paralegal certification program at Seneca College in Toronto. Her long-term dream was clear. She wanted to become a lawyer. During her studies, Christine even completed an internship at a law firm, gaining first-hand experience inside the legal system. The experience only strengthened her determination. At one point, she had even begun planning to pursue a Master of Laws degree in England, hoping to expand her knowledge and eventually build a career in international law. But despite her ambitions, Christine never lost sight of her family. When her mother needed help managing the family's nail salon, Christine temporarily postponed her study abroad plans. She chose to stay in Canada, to help, to support her family. Those close to her described Christine as kind, intelligent, and deeply compassionate. She was someone who balanced ambition with loyalty, and that balance made her loved by almost everyone around her. Quack and Christine first met through the Vietnamese community in the Toronto area. Like many immigrant communities, social connections often formed through cultural events, family networks, and mutual friends. Despite their 12-year age difference, the two quickly discovered something unexpected. They understood each other extremely well. Quack admired Christine's energy and intelligence. Christine admired Quack's stability and determination. What started as a simple connection gradually grew into something deeper. Friends noticed how naturally they fit together. Their personalities balanced each other. Their goals aligned, and their relationship quickly became serious. By 2021, they had already begun discussing marriage. Following Vietnamese tradition, Quack even formally visited Christine's family to ask for permission to marry her. Both families supported the relationship. Wedding discussions had already begun. Plans were being made for a ceremony sometime in 2022. For Christine, it was one of the happiest periods of her life. Just 1 week before the tragedy, she had attended the wedding of Quack's brother. The celebration had only strengthened her excitement for her own future. She talked about wearing a wedding dress, about building a family, about the life she and Quack were planning together. But that future would never come. When police interviewed family members and friends, one detail repeatedly stood out. No one could think of any serious conflict involving the couple. They had no known enemies, no public disputes, no history of violence. From the outside, their lives appeared almost ordinary. Two hard-working people, a growing business, a wedding on the horizon. Everything seemed to be moving forward, which raised an even more disturbing question. If their lives were so stable, then why would someone want them dead? Investigators knew the answer had to lie somewhere in the network of people connected to them. Business partners, customers, friends, acquaintances. Someone within that circle might hold the key. And as detectives continued examining security footage and evidence from the warehouse, one suspicious figure began to stand out. A man captured briefly on camera, his face blurred by darkness, his identity unknown. But investigators were becoming increasingly convinced of one thing. This man had arrived at the warehouse just moments after Quack and Christine walked inside. And his presence there might be the first real clue in uncovering what truly happened that evening. But the most disturbing discovery was still waiting to be uncovered. Because several hours later, long after the industrial park had gone completely quiet, a white box truck would pull into the alley behind the warehouse, and what happened next would confirm investigators' worst fears. As investigators dug deeper into the disappearance of Quack Tran and Christine Guan, one thing became increasingly clear. This was not a random event. Two people had entered their warehouse in the early evening. Their car was still parked outside. Their phones, wallets, and identification had been left behind, and faint bloodstains had already been discovered inside the building. Everything pointed toward the same chilling conclusion. Something violent had happened inside Unit 6 of Ultra Garden Supply. But the biggest question still remained unanswered. Who was responsible? Detectives turned their attention to the security cameras around the warehouse complex. The system inside the building was basic, but several cameras were positioned outside, covering the parking lot and the alley behind the warehouses. Investigators began reviewing hours of footage from the evening of September 18, 2021. At first, the footage simply confirmed the timeline provided by the family. At around 5:30 p.m., Quack Tran and Christine Guan arrived at the warehouse. The video showed them getting out of their vehicle and walking inside together. The door closed behind them, and then, nothing. No footage showed them leaving. But only minutes later, something unusual appeared on the screen. A man briefly walked into view near the warehouse entrance. The camera angle was poor, and the lighting was dim. His face was blurry. Investigators could not clearly identify his features. Still, his presence immediately raised suspicion. Why had this man appeared outside the warehouse just moments after the couple entered? Was he a customer, a delivery driver, or someone who had come specifically to meet them? At this stage, investigators had no way to answer those questions. But their instincts told them that this man was not there by coincidence. Despite the growing suspicions, the investigation had reached a difficult point. Legally speaking, police still faced a major problem. There were no bodies, and without bodies, proving a murder had taken place would be extremely difficult. All they had were small bloodstains, a missing couple, and a blurry figure on a security camera. It wasn't enough. Investigators needed stronger evidence, so they began expanding their search far beyond the warehouse itself. They started collecting security footage from surrounding businesses, nearby roads, and intersections across the industrial park. dozens of cameras, hundreds of hours of video. They hoped that somewhere within those recordings, a single overlooked detail might reveal what happened after the couple entered the building. At the same time, forensic teams continued carefully examining the warehouse. Every surface was tested, every corner inspected. Even the smallest traces of biological evidence were collected. Detectives also began reconstructing the couple's social and business connections. They spoke to friends, interviewed customers, examined financial records, looked for anyone who might have had a reason to harm them. Days passed. Then something unexpected appeared in the footage. Late at night on September 18th, several hours after Quack and Christine had last been seen, one of the security cameras recorded something unusual. It was 11:30 p.m. The industrial park was completely quiet. Most businesses had closed hours earlier. No deliveries were scheduled. No workers were present. And yet, a large white box truck slowly entered the alley behind the warehouse complex. The truck drove directly toward Unit 6, the exact warehouse where the couple had disappeared. Then it stopped. For a few minutes, nothing happened. The camera angle didn't clearly show what the driver was doing, but the truck remained parked there for a short time. And then, just as quietly as it had arrived, the vehicle drove away into the darkness. To most people, the footage might not have seemed important, but to experienced investigators, it immediately triggered alarm bells, because that truck had appeared at the exact location of the suspected crime scene, and it had done so hours after the couple vanished. Even more suspicious, there were no legitimate business activities happening in the area at that time. No scheduled shipments, no deliveries, no reason for any truck to be there at all, which led detectives to a terrifying possibility. What if the truck hadn't been delivering something, but removing something instead? Something from inside the warehouse, something heavy, something that needed to be transported away under the cover of darkness. If that theory was correct, then the truck might have carried the most important evidence in the entire case: the bodies of Quack Tran and Christine Guan. Investigators knew they had to act quickly. If the truck could be identified, it might lead them directly to whoever had been inside the warehouse that night. So on September 28, 2021, police made a critical decision. They released images of the suspicious white box truck to the public. Authorities asked residents across the region to come forward with any information about the vehicle. It was a risky move, but the investigation had reached a standstill, and sometimes the smallest tip from the public could break open an entire case. What detectives didn't expect was that the breakthrough would arrive less than 24 hours later, because someone recognized the truck. And that single piece of information would lead police to a man whose testimony would reveal a horrifying truth about what happened inside the warehouse that night. A truth involving two bodies wrapped in black plastic and a hired driver who helped make them disappear. When police released the image of the mysterious white box truck on September 28, 2021, investigators were hoping for a small lead. Maybe someone had seen the vehicle in the area. Maybe a nearby business had recorded a clearer image. What they didn't expect was that the case would suddenly move forward faster than anyone imagined. Less than 24 hours later, a crucial tip reached investigators. Someone recognized the truck, and that single phone call would unravel the first real layer of the crime. On September 29, 2021, police arrested a man named Ricardo Leard, a 36-year-old resident of Vaughan. Investigators quickly confirmed something important. Ricardo was not the killer, but he was directly connected to the events that took place after Quack Tran and Christine Guan disappeared. Ricardo had been the driver of the white box truck seen in the surveillance footage that night. According to early findings from the investigation, he had been called to the warehouse late on the evening of September 18th. Someone had asked him to bring the truck there. Someone who already knew exactly what had happened inside that building. During interrogation, detectives began pressing Ricardo for answers. At first, he appeared nervous and hesitant, but eventually, under questioning, the truth began to emerge, and what he described sent a chill through the entire investigate. Ricardo told investigators that on the night of September 18th, he had received a call from a man he knew. The man asked him to drive a truck to the warehouse complex on Zenway Boulevard. He was told there were some items that needed to be transported. Nothing unusual. At least that was what Ricardo claimed he believed at the time. When he arrived at the warehouse late that night, he backed the truck up to the rear door of Unit 6. Waiting for him, there was the man who had made the call. And then came the moment Ricardo would later describe in court. The warehouse door opened. Inside, the building was dark and quiet. The man brought out two large objects wrapped in black plastic. Together, they loaded the bundles into the back of the truck. Ricardo claimed he didn't ask questions, but he admitted something important. Deep down, he already suspected something was terribly wrong, because those plastic-wrapped shapes looked disturbingly like human bodies. Following the instructions he had been given, Ricardo drove the truck away from the warehouse. The drive lasted only a few minutes. Not far from the industrial park, he stopped near a large industrial dumpster. Then he did something investigators would later describe as deeply disturbing. He threw both plastic-wrapped bundles into the dumpster. Two human beings, discarded like garbage. Once the job was finished, Ricardo drove the truck away and returned home. For him, the task was complete. But for investigators, his testimony confirmed their worst fears. Quac Tran and Christine Guan had not simply disappeared. They had been murdered inside their own warehouse, and someone had carefully arranged for their bodies to be removed and hidden. With this new information, investigators moved quickly. They began tracing where the dumpster's contents had been transported. Waste management records revealed an important timeline. On September 24th, 6 days after the murders, garbage from that area had been collected and transported to multiple landfill sites. One of them was the Twin Creeks Environmental Landfill in Watford, Ontario, more than 250 kilometers away. For investigators, this created a massive challenge. The landfill contained thousands of tons of garbage. Somewhere inside that enormous mountain of waste were the remains of two victims. Still, the search began. For days, teams of investigators and forensic specialists carefully sifted through piles of refuse. The work was exhausting, slow, and emotionally draining. Then finally, after days of searching, investigators made a heartbreaking discovery. On October 1st, 2021, they located the remains of Quac Tran buried within the landfill. An autopsy later confirmed the cause of death. He had been shot, but even after weeks of searching, the body of Christine Guan was never found. Investigators believed she had been disposed of in the same landfill or possibly transported to another site. Despite their efforts, her remains remain missing to this day. Ricardo's testimony also revealed the identity of the person who had called him that night. The man who had arranged everything. The man who had likely pulled the trigger. His name was Phuong Tan Nguyen, also known as Mike, a 35-year-old man living in Toronto. Police soon discovered something even more alarming. Just 4 days after the murders, Phuong had boarded a flight leaving Canada. His destination, Mexico. From there, he disappeared. By the time investigators identified him as the primary suspect, he was already gone. Authorities quickly issued a nationwide arrest warrant for Phuong Tan Nguyen. He was charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder, the most serious criminal charge under Canadian law. But catching him would prove far more difficult than expected, because Phuong Tan Nguyen had already begun a new life, somewhere far beyond the reach of Canadian police. By the time investigators fully understood what had happened inside the warehouse on Zenway Boulevard, the man believed to be responsible was already gone. Gone not just from the city, but from the country. The suspect identified by police, Phuong Tan Nguyen, also known as Mike, had disappeared only days after the murders of Quac Tran and Christine Guan. And the more investigators uncovered about his movements, the more it appeared that his escape had been carefully planned. Records showed that on September 22, 2021, just 4 days after the killings, Phuong Tan Nguyen boarded a flight departing from Toronto. His destination was Mexico, By the time police issued the arrest warrant and publicly named him as the prime suspect, he was already thousands of kilometers away. And after that flight, he seemed to vanish. There were no confirmed sightings, no financial transactions that could clearly be linked to him, no communication that investigators could trace. It was as if he had deliberately erased himself. Canadian authorities quickly expanded the search internationally. Police began coordinating with Interpol, Mexican authorities, and other international law enforcement agencies. His photograph and identifying details were circulated worldwide. But even with those efforts, Phuong Thanh Nguyen remained elusive. For investigators, the case had suddenly transformed into something far larger. It was now an international manhunt. What made the situation even more disturbing was how little stood out about Phuong before the crime. According to available records, he had no prior criminal history, no violent offenses, no serious legal trouble. To most people who knew him, he appeared to be just another ordinary man living in Toronto. He was described as quiet, low profile, someone who rarely attracted attention. But the evidence investigators had gathered told a very different story, because the way the crime had been carried out suggested something chilling. It had been planned. Phuong had brought a firearm when he met the victims. After the killings, he had quickly arranged for help to dispose of the bodies, and within days he had already left the country. These actions suggested a level of calculation that detectives rarely saw in first-time offenders. While the hunt for Phuong continued, the investigation against Ricardo Liard, the truck driver who helped dispose of the bodies, slowly moved forward through the Canadian court system. For years, the legal process continued as prosecutors gathered evidence and built their case. Then, in January 2025, a major development finally occurred. During a court hearing in Ontario, Ricardo Liard unexpectedly pleaded guilty. He admitted to 2 counts of indignity to human remains, acknowledging his role in helping dispose of the bodies after the murders had already taken place. According to court records, Liard broke down emotionally during the hearing. When the judge asked whether he understood the consequences of his plea, he reportedly paused for several moments before answering. Then he quietly said yes. Under the plea agreement, prosecutors agreed to drop the more serious accessory charges. Their primary goal was still the same: capture Phuong Thanh Nguyen. Liard's confession confirmed what investigators had long suspected. The bundles loaded into the truck that night had indeed been the bodies of Quoc Tran and Christine Nguyen, wrapped in plastic, removed from the warehouse, and discarded in a dumpster. Despite the guilty plea and the recovery of Quoc Tran's remains, the case still carries an overwhelming sense of unfinished justice. Christine Nguyen's body has never been found. Investigators believe her remains may still be buried somewhere within a landfill, or possibly transported to another location entirely. For her family, that uncertainty has been devastating. Without her remains, they have never been able to give her a proper burial, never been able to fully say goodbye, and perhaps most haunting of all, the man believed to have planned and carried out the murders is still free. More than 4 years after the crime, Phuong Thanh Nguyen remains one of Canada's most wanted fugitives. Police believe he may still be hiding somewhere outside the country. They have also warned that he could be armed and dangerous, urging the public not to approach him if he is ever seen. Even after years of investigation, one mystery remains frustratingly unresolved. Why would Phuong Thanh Nguyen target Quoc Tran and Christine Nguyen? Police have confirmed that Phuong knew the victims beforehand. Some sources suggest they may have had business dealings related to the gardening supply industry, but the exact nature of the conflict has never been officially revealed. Several theories have circulated among investigators and journalists: a financial dispute, a failed business arrangement, personal resentment or jealousy, or even involvement in illegal operations connected to hydroponic equipment, an industry sometimes linked to underground cannabis growing operations. But without Phuong's arrest, those theories remain speculation. And until he is captured and brought to court, the full truth may remain hidden. What is known for certain is this: Two young people with bright futures were taken from their families in a brutal and calculated act of violence. One of them still has no grave, and the man accused of orchestrating the crime continues to live somewhere in the shadows. But the story does not end there, because in cases like this, justice has a way of catching up, sometimes years later. And when it does, the final chapter can be far more powerful than anyone expects. More than 4 years have passed since the night Quack Tran and Christine Guan walked into their warehouse and never walked out again. Yet even today, the story still feels unfinished. Because while investigators have uncovered many pieces of the truth, the most important one is still missing. The man accused of planning the murders has never been captured. For the families of Quack Tran and Christine Guan, time has not eased the pain. Every court hearing, every news update, every public appeal for information, all of it has been part of a long and painful wait for justice. The discovery of Quack Tran's remains in the landfill brought a small measure of closure. At least his family could finally lay him to rest. But for Christine's family, the nightmare remains incomplete. Her body has never been found. Somewhere, perhaps buried deep in a landfill, or possibly in another location investigators have yet to discover. The remains of a young woman with dreams of becoming a lawyer still lie hidden. Without that discovery, her family has never been able to hold a funeral, never been able to say goodbye, and that absence has left a wound that cannot heal. The legal system has moved forward in part. Ricardo Leard, the truck driver who helped dispose of the bodies, admitted his role and accepted responsibility under Canadian law. But for many people following the case, his conviction represents only a small part of the justice that should be served, because investigators believe he was never the mastermind. He was the helper, the one who assisted after the killings. The real question still points to the man who allegedly planned everything, the man who brought the gun, the man who arranged the disposal, the man who boarded a flight and disappeared into another country just days later. Phuong Tan Guan. Until he is found, the case remains open in the minds of many. It is rare for someone to vanish so completely in the modern world. In an era of digital records, surveillance cameras, and international databases, fugitives usually leave some trace. But Phuong Tan Guan has managed to remain hidden for years. Investigators believe he may have financial support or assistance from people helping him stay off the radar. They also believe he may have changed locations multiple times since leaving Canada. But somewhere out there, he is still living with the knowledge of what happened that night. And police have made one thing clear: they will not stop searching, even if it takes years, even if it takes decades. Cases like this have a long memory, and fugitives who believe they have escaped justice often discover that the past eventually catches up with them. When people look back on the case of Quack Tran and Christine Guan, one question continues to linger. What could possibly drive someone to commit such a brutal act against two people who appeared to have done nothing wrong? Was it money? A business dispute? Jealousy? Or a secret conflict that has never been revealed publicly? Without the suspect in custody, investigators may never know the full story behind the motive. But what is clear is this: the crime was not random. It was targeted, and it was carried out with chilling calculation. Cases like this force us to confront an uncomfortable truth about human nature. Sometimes the most dangerous people are not the ones who appear violent or unstable. Sometimes they are the ones who seem ordinary, quiet, unremarkable, the kind of people who blend into everyday life without drawing attention. Until one moment changes everything. Today, the names Quack Tran and Christine Guan remain a painful reminder of a future that was stolen. 2 young lives, 2 families forever changed, and a mystery that still waits for its final chapter. But somewhere in the world, the man accused of this crime is still out there. And when the day finally comes that he is found, the truth about what really happened inside that quiet warehouse in Vaughan may finally be revealed. What do you think really happened between Phuong Tan Guan and the couple? Was it a business dispute that spiraled out of control, or something far more personal hidden beneath the surface? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below.
Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more videos.